Specialization, of course, leads to improved products and services, but on the downside, it also makes the economic system of a society more fragile. As people become more specialized, they are also more at a danger of becoming completely useless to society if their skill or knowledge is no longer required. Another problem of specialization is that people tend to lose the general base of knowledge that everyone in society shares, and this leads to a loss of communication amongst people and therefore a loss of unity within society. My name is Amos Zweig. I write and talk about political philosophy, economics, ethics, and society. In the following, you will see a clip of a conversation that I had with Christoffer Døhlen from Norway, in which we talked about the pros and cons of specialization.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Amos. Right. So, as we talked about, today we see a very high degree of specialization in society, where you have lots of people in academia who are very much concentrated on very small and limited fields within some scientific realm, and not that much involved in other areas. So I would say that a problem with this very strong degree or extreme degree of specialization is that one loses, first of all, as we sort of addressed, one loses perhaps the way that knowledge of the world in general has some philosophical broad principle behind it, because we discussed about what is philosophy, the definition of philosophy, and it seems like that all science can really be understood as some parts of philosophy, perhaps in a certain sense. And if you look back in the past, we see that many of the philosophers were scientists in many aspects, like Aristotle and many of these polymaths, I think they're called, that they are knowledgeable about many areas at the same time. Leibniz, the famous German philosopher, I think was the same, etc. But when you have this extreme specialization today, you sort of lose how you lose the overarching broad understanding of how everything is connected together, and you lose the philosophical aspect of that field which you are specializing. So I think perhaps, for instance, the philosophy of logical positivism or scientism, the idea that we can only know things through the natural scientific method, might perhaps be, at least to a certain degree, influenced by this way of just looking at hard sciences and completely neglecting all other philosophical disciplines or scientific disciplines. So that's one problem. And also I would say that there is this problem of people having this general thirst of knowledge of the world in a general sense. As Aristotle put it famously, all men desire to know. And at least in my experience, and I think many others experience the same, we have this longing to understand the world, how things work together, not just a very small piece of it necessarily, but rather wanting to bring other fields into our understanding as well, to have a general introduction or presentation of the world. I think that is a desire that many people have, and that might be lost today. Yeah, so those are two considerations that I have about this topic for now.
Yes, thank you very much for summarizing this part of our conversation. Just to add, also, we said that specialization also has an advantage, which is that you get maybe very high quality products in different areas of interest. So, for example, there might be a person who does nothing else than eye surgery, and he will become very good at it. And if you have a problem with your eyes, then you will much prefer to go to a specialized surgeon than to someone who does everything from surgery to massage to whatever nourishment treatment. So yeah, there is an advantage. Sorry, there is an advantage to specialization, but also it comes at a cost. And I can very much relate to what you said, that I am at least someone, I really desire to understand how the world works, but not just one small aspect of it, but many different aspects of it. So this, and yeah, we said philosophy might be like a meta science, or also like the oldest science before it was split into its different disciplines. So philosophers would just try to understand how the world works and what it actually is, and maybe also how certain things should be, in the sense, at least, or in social and moral domains. And today all of these things are very much split apart, and this has advantages, but it also had disadvantages. One disadvantage that we also mentioned was that there is the risk that if people become very, very specialized, then they are only in the end able to do exactly one thing. And if for some reason the structure of the economy or of the society shifts a little bit, and different products are required or different skills are required, then many people can become completely useless to society, because they are now specialized nail clippers for pets. But if people don't have pets anymore, then this entire industry just vanishes. Whereas in a society where people are much more generally skilled, like, for example, in more primitive societies where people are more, how do you call this, self-sufficient. So everybody has their small farm and they repair their tools themselves, they make their food themselves, they produce 80% of what they use by themselves. Such a society is much more robust. If something happens or something shifts, all of these people are skilled in a very broad area, so they will always be useful. Whereas someone who is very hyper-specialized, you might even say, it's a big danger that he will become completely useless to society at some point.
Yes, that's a very good point that you brought up there. So yeah, I think if you have this hyper-specialization, you can have this extreme kind of division of labor that might be so extreme that people lose some sort of, you could say, independence and the ability to generally contribute to society, but rather feel that they are closed in a very, very limited and isolated system, perhaps. This might be related to some of the famous critics by Karl Marx about the capitalist system being alienating for the worker, because now they can't really be this general independent craftsman, but instead have to do very, very limited hyper-specialized tasks at a factory, which might be alienating and be very boring and be sort of problematic to our human nature. So I think Marx had a good point on that specific area, though he was dead wrong on many other issues. But yes, so I think that's a good point, that hyper-specialization might be problematic for human nature, it might be alienating. And also, if you look at the past, we can see that it seems to be the case that it was a focus that people should be knowledgeable about many issues to a considerable degree, and that was considered to be a criteria for being an important contributor to society. That's at least my impression. For instance, we have the people who run the British Empire in the 19th century, the officers, the public administrators. When they went to university and were educated, they were reading Plato and Aristotle. They were reading The Republic by Plato and Politics by Aristotle. So it seems that even though their education was directed toward public administration of the British Empire, they were still introduced to ancient philosophy. So this is a very interesting phenomenon. This might be explained at least partly by the fact that if people have a general understanding and wisdom of things in a broader sense, that might be good for that particular field they're going to work in. There might be wiser, and wisdom or prudence is certainly a very good virtue that is very useful in so many circumstances. It's useful all the time. And if people have a general understanding of history and economics and politics and philosophy, all this might contribute to him having some wisdom in him, which might be able to guide him when they have a specific issue at hand, when they have such an issue at hand. So I think that's very good. And also taking history as an example, let's say you have social science or politics or economics or perhaps even some hard science thing. I think still, if you have a general understanding of history, for instance, that might be very useful to understanding human nature, how humans behave and do not behave. And I can imagine that is very useful when people having economic considerations or considerations in social science and whatever. Yeah, so I think a general understanding of things or generalization contributes to wisdom. And we can see this historically with the focus that, yes, even public administrators read Plato and Aristotle to have this general philosophical understanding. So that's interesting, I thought.
Yes, that's a good point. I think that's a very good point, that being generally, broadly knowledgeable or wise is also very advantageous for many things. And as you said, public administrators or people in politics, but also I would imagine if you are just working in industry or you have a business and you are working in that business, it's very maybe not, you can't really put like a price tag on it and say, ah, this is now making my product worth $10 more or something. But in general, it helps you make more sound and stable decisions and deal with more different possible situations that might come up if you have a broader knowledge. Whereas if you are only just an expert in programming, for example, then you might build a very successful programming company in this societal situation that you know right now, but you might be completely blind to the fact that something seems to be changing, and then it strikes you by surprise and your business falls apart. This just reminded me of a topic that I'm very interested in at the moment, which is this cycle of civilizations. And I have just thought that maybe hyper-specialization is an essential part of this cycle, because I read this essay by a Sir John Glubb. The essay is called The Faith of Empires, I think, or Faith of Nations, that's what it's called. And there he says that in the beginning of every empire, you have a very primitive people who basically come from a quite poor circumstance, but they are very united. They are very united, and they are all basically generalists, because they have to just kind of survive in any way and feed themselves. And then they make a huge military expansion. And then in this huge empire, a lot of trade and specialization of labor occurs, which leads to more and more more and more wealth being generated. But at the same time, I think with growing commerce, it almost seems natural to me that there would be more and more specialization. Because if you just think in a very primitive setting, there's, for example, just one style of clothes that you can buy, or because everybody makes their own clothes, so they are not very very fashionable. They are just very functional, just a shirt and a pair of pants, and that's it. But then as commerce increases, now you can buy a beautiful shirt or the same old boring shirt. And so people will be more attracted to buy the beautiful shirt if it goes for the same price. And so there is this incentive for people who are active in this industry to specialize. So one guy will sew the shirt, and the other one will decorate the shirt, and the other one will dye it with special colors, and some people will produce these colors, and so on. And so there is this tendency towards more and more specialization, but at the same time, specialization, as we said, makes the society more fragile, because now you have people who are producing colors and people who are specialists of decorating. But if an economic downturn comes, then nobody cares if the shirt is decorated as long as they even have a shirt. And so this might be just one part of this cycle of civilizations. So what do you think of that idea?
Yes, that's a good point, and it seems logical that, yes, as society grows more and more affluent, and you have more resources, etc., then you might have people having division of labor to a higher and higher degree, and therefore you have more and more specialization. So that seems to be a logical point there. And also another way you could argue for the increasing tendency of specialization in society is that if you have a completely new, fresh field of study, then the first people who will endeavor or investigate that study will have some theories of their own. But then later there come some new people in that study, and they will build upon those theories, or perhaps criticize it and try to reform it, or even perhaps replace it. And then the people going after them again have to study both the original scientists in that field, as well as the new ones who criticize them or came up with new ideas or whatever. And then they come up with new theories. And then after them, there is a new generation who just have to read all their theories and build upon them. So you might say that there is a tendency of being accumulative in those sciences, more and more knowledge over time. When one can look at the philosophy of history and see that, well, if you look at the last 500 years, there have been many new philosophical theories about ethics and metaphysics. Before the Renaissance, you didn't have to study René Descartes and John Stuart Mill or Karl Marx or any of the modern philosophers, because their ideas were completely foreign. But now today, you have to maybe consider all those before the Renaissance and everyone after. So you see that it's an accumulative tendency in those sciences. And that might encourage specialization. So yes, I think that's also another way we could say that it's increasing. But as you say, if you have too much specialization, it will become problematic for that society. And I would say that you might lose a sort of unity that is important in society. Because if you have a certain unity that people can have the same understanding, generally speaking, then that is good for society, which is dependent upon unity. But if you have people being so isolated in their own specialized field, they might lose some sort of connection to other fields, which might be necessary to have the good of the whole of science. So that's perhaps an abstract way of saying that it is problematic. And we can see in society today that people being very specialized in some fields, but there is so much that people are not really interested in learning about other fields, which people were more interested in before. There are many people today who seems not to have read any books on their leisure time. Many people who don't have any particular books in their bookshelves, perhaps, and have less general knowledge about things than they used to do before, even though information is far more available today than before. Now you can just go to Google and find whatever you want to do on Wikipedia or some other website. But still, there seems that many people are not reading books in the same degree they did before. I think before it was very common to have people having bookshelves about history or something else on their bookshelves. But today that seems to be more and more absent. And that seems to me to be a sad tendency. It also, another problem related to this is that those who study within a field might not be able to talk about this knowledge as it has to other people outside that field. And that might be sad, like being isolated. You can't really talk about these experiments to anyone else but the other scientists in your field, because it's so specialized, people don't know what you're talking about. But if people have a general understanding of things, then it's much easier to have a deep conversation with people who are doing other things in society, because you both have this bottom understanding of things. But that's also another problem with specialization, the lack of communicating with people of other fields.
That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you found it interesting and thought-provoking. If you had some particular realization or just a general thought that you wanted to share on the content, then please feel free to write a comment. I would be very happy to read and respond. Also, if you liked the video, then please consider to subscribe and also maybe to like the video so that you will get more similar content recommended to you. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you all on another video soon. Goodbye.